This is DIB Tech Talk, a show where we make sense of all things cybersecurity for the defense industrial base. Threat hunting is the practice of proactively searching for indicators of threat on your network. Indicators of threat can be a variation in normal activities, like a spike in activity, for example, or it can look like a slow, low burn of constant activity when there should be no activity. It's impossible to defend a network 100% against malicious cyber actors, so it's not a matter of if you'll be compromised, but when. It takes the average company more than 6 months to discover a network breach. Threat hunting significantly reduces the time it takes to realize your network has been compromised. Reducing the time to detect a compromise is proven to reduce the cost of compromise. So stay tuned as I take aim at threat hunting.
I'm Vince Crisler. I'm the CEO and founder of Dark-Cubed. We are a cybersecurity software as a service company focused on solving the problems for small and mid-sized companies. I have a long background in security, going back over 20 years. Got my start in my career as an Air Force communications officer, had the opportunity to spend some time in the Pentagon and then the White House Communications Agency. I was sent from the White House Communications Agency over to the White House to be the CISO for the unclassified networks there. Which is a really fascinating time. It was during the spin-up of the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative, and I had the chance to build the first ever 24/7 by 365 security operations center for the White House's unclassified networks. From there, I spent about 5.5 years over at the Department of Homeland Security as a contractor, helping out with the National Cybersecurity Protection System, the Einstein program. One of kind of the things that I really enjoyed the most there is I had a chance to build this program called the Enhanced Cybersecurity Services Program, or ECS. And we built that program, and it got announced by President Obama in an executive order, in the Critical Infrastructure Executive Order. And it was those experiences from the White House to building the ECS program that really led me down this path of there's got to be a better way to solve these problems for small and mid-sized companies. There's got to be a better approach to cybersecurity that works at scale. And that's why I founded Dark-Cubed and how I got my start in where I am today. The DIB cybersecurity program. So they've signed a partnership agreement with the DoD, with a group called the DoD Cybersecurity Information Sharing Environment, or DICE. And so what DICE has done is they've stood up this program they call DICE 3, DICE Cubed for Dark-Cubed. And there's an agreement that they have to sign to participate here that kind of says they're aware of the sharing and how the process works. So they have to sign an agreement to participate. And it's free to those defense contractors. So the DoD is paying the license.
Like, can people,
what was that?
Yeah, can people like raise their hand and say, hey, can people like email you and say, hey, Vince, can I join?
Absolutely. Yeah, the DoD has procured license for up to 100 companies, and we're actively filling those now.
That's awesome. So how do people,
great.
I guess, raise their hand to voluntarily join that?
So they can email info@darkcube.com. If they're a part of the DIB CS program and they know they are, they can contact DICE and say, hey, I want to learn more about this DICE 3 program.
Okay, so let's say I'm a small business and I want to buy into it because I don't have the in-house knowledge, but I want to make sure that my data is secure. What am I signing myself up for? Like, does this mean that they can look at my company information? Can they look at my proprietary data? What privacy is at risk here? What actually can they see when I sign up for this?
So the data we're collecting are basically syslog or net flow coming off of your firewall. So this is stuff like where traffic is coming from, where it's going from, how much data volume, what ports and protocols are being used. The content of those communications is never shared. And that communication is used to then say, which threats is your network communicating with and which ones should we block? And that data gets anonymized and sent to the DoD. So they're seeing a summary of that metadata that is not attributable back to your company. So there's very little risk to a company, but you're also able to be protected from those government known indicators and other threats without having to do anything.
Okay, can you explain a little bit why it's important to monitor the ports and the influx and outflux of flow, and why is it important to monitor that kind of metadata? How does that indicate threats, and why is that, like, how does that work? Because I imagine most people, they hear these things and they're like, oh, cool, it monitors my ports, but like, why? Why does that matter? And especially given the SolarWinds compromise, like, how do these all relate? How is monitoring for these kinds of threat via your firewall metadata, how does that tie into SolarWinds, and why would that be ever more important now?
Right, so the first level is just thinking about IOCs. So when the SolarWinds breach was released, when these recent Exchange hacks were released, there are IOCs that are published. So FireEye released IOCs, indicators of compromise on the SolarWinds hack. And so the question is, how do you look for those 20 IPs to see if they're on your network? And so that's the first step is, are you collecting information on what your firewall's seeing so you can see if you're subject to these threats or not? The second piece then says, well, when it comes to ports and protocols, is it an RDP connection, so a remote desktop connection? Is it SSH, so somebody SSH into a server that's on your network? And that's where you kind of start to cross over into the threat hunting side. So the DoD analyst can actually say, let me look at SSH connections, people remoting into servers over the last 24 hours. Are any of these associated with known bad things? And so there could be potential command and control occurring. And so they're able to look for compromise or data exfil by using the ports and protocols. So we start with IOCs, and then the ports and protocols let us do a little bit more.
So what would data exfiltration look like from the metadata perspective? Like how would you guys, what are the indicators of adversarial data exfiltration?
Right, so you could have a slow and low, so it could be a very very low level of data exfiltration that happens over a couple of days, in which case you'll see kind of a constant flow of information to an unknown source. Or it could be a major spike, right? The attacker's on the network and doesn't think you're monitoring, and they're just going to exfil 10 gigs of data up into the cloud. And that spike is pretty visible on network traffic.
So what happens if you see that spike? Are you guys able to threat hunt immediately and go after the adversary to find out where it's gone and potentially, I would say recover it, but it's not like it's a single thing, right? Like in theory, the data still resides on your network, but now they have a copy of it. So how
Correct.
Is there a way to recover or, stop the damage from being done once the indicator arises?
Yeah, there are all sorts of statistics ranging from 90 days to 6 months after a compromise that threats are discovered. And so a key here is finding out as soon as possible. So if you can see that first data exfil, that data's gone and it's gone and you're in trouble. But if you're able to pick that up and stop them there, you could save 6 months of pain. And so it's really, it's important being able to watch for these sorts of things. And on the DoD side, the DoD analysts are watching for these things all the time. And they'll reach out to us and say, hey, I don't know who this company is, but we saw data exfil. Can you reach out to them and let them know we're standing by to help if they need it?
So you guys are kind of serving as that privacy shield barrier between the government and actually the clients, right? So the government doesn't know who your client is, but they can inform you, and you guys act as the shepherd to inform the company. So so it's not literally the DoD Big Brother watching the companies, right? You guys are that middleman barrier.
Yeah, when we think about this element of privacy, a key part of my background is I spent about 5.5 years at Homeland Security working on some of the national cybersecurity programs there. And a key part of our philosophy here is, these DoD contractors need help. Small companies need help, but they don't want Big Brother watching their network. And so if you can come up with an approach that allows the government to provide support without monitoring that specific company, without the risk of blowback, you can solve these problems in a really interesting way. And that's a key part of our approach in the market.
So is what you guys do scalable? What if, DoD, CIO and ANS and the principal cyber advisor were like, you know what, this is a great program. We want to scale this for the whole DIB. Can you guys scale and accurately or actively be able to monitor, the entire defense industrial base, which is estimated about 300,000 companies?
Yeah, we've built our program to scale. We're scaling significantly on the commercial side because we're a cloud native, because we're using a lot of these newer technologies that'll enable you to scale, pretty rapidly. That's a key part of our program is we can scale at an affordable cost. And so, rather than talking about, tens of millions of dollars, we can do this much more cost effectively than other folks in the market because of our technology stack.
So when you say affordable to small business, and I won't ask you for any firm numbers, but do you guys price by endpoint? Do you price by company size, by revenue? How do you guys make it affordable? Because I know a lot of companies say it's affordable, but then when you peel back the layers, if you add on, this cost per endpoint and this cost per endpoint, suddenly these small businesses are paying $200 for services for endpoints, and it's just not per month, and it's just not affordable. How do you keep it affordable for these small businesses?
It's a great question. A lot of people approach the cybersecurity market top down. Like, what do the big enterprises do it, and how do we dumb that down for everybody else? And that's where you run into problems of cost and scalability and expertise. We approach the market from the bottom up, and we said, how do you build a system that solves these problems at the right price point? Our primary go-to-market in the commercial market is through managed service providers. And they're working with all the small and mid-sized businesses in the country. And so our approach to them is we keep it super simple. No long-term commitments. You pay by the firewall. We bill you every month for the number of firewalls that are up and running. And a key part of our value prop to these managed service providers is, helping them generate recurring revenue and helping them provide better services to their companies in the cybersecurity space. So how can they add on cybersecurity services and other support for their customers at a very, very effective price point?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting partnership to have with MSPs, because MSPs, like you said, provide services and potentially even equipment to the defense industrial base and other GovCons. So I'm sure you're familiar with the CMMC, the Cyber Maturity Model
Yep.
Certification, which is this new requirement to require a third-party audit of your cybersecurity posture of your company. That's great. But part of the CMMC is the requirement to have policies, and you have to have explicit policies that address every single control in the entire framework, and there's 130 controls. A few of the controls, and there's a whole domain about auditing
Yep.
logs, keeping logs, what are you logging and auditing, and how often are you doing it? And so the policies that these companies are required to have, and sorry for the long lead up, but the policies
Okay.
that these companies are required to have, they have to go into detail where they talk about what they're logging and how often they're monitoring those logs. Have you guys started documenting those types of policy points so that you can communicate those to the MSP, who then communicate them to their clients, or at least to the MSP? Because when the client undergoes an audit, now suddenly you're in scope for their assessment. Have you guys thought about that angle of the CMMC?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a key part of our partnership, both with the MSPs and on the DoD side. When you look at both NIST 800-171 and CMMC, there are the audit requirements. There's also requirements around threat intelligence sharing, threat monitoring, looking for network threats. And so as a part of the materials that the DoD publishes to their contractors, they show which security controls we help with. In the commercial side, we certainly work with our managed service provider partners on what security controls we can help with when it comes to CMMC 800-171 or other audit frameworks that are out there commercially.
That's awesome. That should be super helpful. So so you guys, you monitor firewalls. So companies, like a lot of these small businesses don't even have firewalls. Like, they have a wireless network. So is there anything, do you guys monitor anything besides firewall traffic, or like, is it firewalls as basic as you can go? Um, Go ahead.
Yeah, today we're mainly focused on that perimeter with the firewall, because that's where we can make up the most ground. If you think
Right.
about the 80-20% rule, how can you provide the most value as efficiently as possible? And so, we see that's where small and mid-sized companies are largely unprotected because of lack of any security capability. And so we're solving that problem first, but we have strategic plans to expand beyond that as we continue to grow.
No, that makes total sense. So have you guys seen an uptick in threat indicators post SolarWinds, or is it just always are threats always a constant, I guess, in cyber, or has there been a market uptick in activity?
Yeah, I think over the last couple of years, the community has gotten better and better about sharing information about threats. And so, for us, it's how do you make that actionable for small and mid-sized companies?
Right.
Unfortunately, most small and mid-sized companies, if you gave them a list of, say, here's 100 IPs that if you block these, you'll never be hacked, most companies wouldn't know what to do with that, right? And so how do you make this threat intelligence sharing actionable for these small and mid-sized companies? And another key partnership for us this year has been the CompTIA stood up their new information sharing and analysis organization focused on managed service providers, and we're a key part of that initiative. And I'm on the executive council for CompTIA in that effort.
And are you guys tied into DHS and CISA with all of their stuff, all of their threat sharing that they do as well?
We are not today, but that's a key part of our focus going forward is continuing to work with those. I know a lot of those folks from my time there as a contractor, but it's a great organization. They're making a lot of progress.
Yeah. Yeah, they provide lots of services to critical infrastructure components, and a lot of the DIB falls into that. Um, so, what else is important for people to understand regarding threat monitoring? Because the CMMC is relatively new. Understanding cybersecurity for small businesses is it feels new. It's not new, but to a lot of companies, it feels new. And so, if I were to put myself in their shoes and I would hear something as cool as threat hunting and threat monitoring, I would think that this is a vanity, potentially like unnecessary activity.
Yeah.
Can you explain why that this is not a vanity project and this is not a nice to have, but it's a should have or a must have for networks?
Yeah, I think, we talked earlier about SolarWinds, and I think that's a great example where you have a major breach that hits hundreds or thousands of companies. And so when you have information about a threat out there in the form of these IOCs, how do you block that at scale across as many companies as possible? How do you protect folks? How do you get them visibility into reporting, whether they should be worried or not? And, we were able to answer that question in a matter of minutes once that report came out to say, hey, none of our customers here have been targeted. You saw one of these indicators a year and a half ago. And again, I think people overestimate the security level of small and mid-sized companies, and I think people tend to sugarcoat that. And I think we're worse off than people realize. And so, one of my biggest challenges in trying to change the mindset of folks is, people are used to the enterprise world about all of these technologies and, MDM and all of these other technologies that the company should have, and those just aren't feasible in the small and mid-market. And so the question is, how do we solve the immediate problem of getting them more secure, where better is good enough, and then we can solve the more strategic problems. And that's a key part of our market is, what we're saying is what we're doing in terms of threat detection and blocking on networks is not enough, but it definitely is the place you should start to at least provide a
Absolutely.
basic level of security and visibility.
So how would you recommend a an employee in a small business who has potentially been tasked as like the sole person responsible for CMMC, like get me CMMC, I want to be ready, because I hear this all the time for the last 12 months, and especially since the interim rule was published in December of last year, companies will call and say, my CEO told me to get CMMC in 6 months, and we're like, well, depends on where you are.
Yeah.
So how would you advise that person who is probably, one of 10 in the leadership of a small business who maybe has 50 employees? How do they communicate to their CEO that this sort of capability is important? Like because it doesn't generate revenue, right? So it's really hard to say like your return on investment is XYZ, but is there a way, or how should they be thinking about communicating this to the C-suite, to the CEO who, you know, doesn't really want to spend money on non-revenue generating functions, doesn't want to add to overhead, but how do you, in a really straightforward manner, explain that if you don't do this, this is the risk, or if you do this, like, how do you communicate to a C-suite?
Yeah, I think we've been here for a while, but cyber threat is ubiquitous. I think, if you're connected to the internet, you're going to be targeted. And there's significantly opportunity for a loss of revenue, a loss of brand reputation and trust in the market if you don't start to address security concerns. So, I think, and, I always say the punchline at the end of the joke for all the geeks in cybersecurity is about boring old risk management. So how do you apply basic risk management principles to your business when it comes to cybersecurity? And so there I think about threat, vulnerability, and consequence. And how do you manage those attributes for your small business? And that's language that your C-suite will understand. And so the question is, if it's likely we're going to get hacked, do we want to tell our customers we weren't prepared and we were caught flat-footed, or we were doing these basic things? And that's where that argument really comes down. And especially when it comes to CMMC and these other programs, the best way I've seen people advocate for this in companies is contractors like us are leaning forward in the CMMC market, and they're going to win business that we won't have the opportunity to win. And business leaders understand that.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And the point you made earlier about the average time to discovering compromise is 6 months to a year. And so if you have a service like this, you can at least communicate to your clients or customers, like, hey, we caught it, but we caught it quickly. We caught it, the day it happened and not
Correct.
6 months later. So you're not getting emails from random company is saying, sorry, your data was exfiltrated 6 months ago. You might want to go change all your passwords.
Exactly.
So what else is important to know about threat monitoring that we haven't already talked about that is important to the average business consumer? Because you guys are B2B, you're not B2C, right? You don't
Correct.
have products or services for home use, right? Which I would love to have one for home use, but alas, it's probably not not a sustainable business model to have such a secure home. But what are other things that are important in the threat monitoring world that you see and talk about that maybe we haven't talked about here?
Yeah, I think not to overthink it. A lot of these threats that are being successful in small and medium businesses today are commoditized. We're seeing bulk scanning, bulk attempts at exploitation. When a zero-day is released through a partner of ours, Gray Noise, who's doing a great job at watching for some of these bulk scanning activities, we're seeing within a matter of minutes and hours after a 0-day is released, the entire internet is being scanned for those 0 days. And so it's not about sophisticated nation state threats. It's about the bulk commoditized threats. And if you have a strategy to provide a floor of protection against those threats, you can significantly improve your security. And so to me, it's just, don't overthink it. Get some basic capabilities in place, get some visibility in place, and then make risk-based decisions about where to go from there.
Can you briefly explain what a 0-day exploit is and why that is so scary? Like what?
Could you repeat that? You broke up.
Yeah, sorry. Can you explain what a 0-day is and why that is? Just explain what it is and why it's so dangerous. Why they are so dangerous and scary.
Yeah, we continue to see in the press reports of 0-day threats and kind of all sorts of flags and alarms being raised against them. And quite simply, a 0-day threat is something that somebody doesn't know about. It's a vulnerability in a software or application that has not been patched, that was just discovered. And so day 0 is when it's discovered. And then day 14, day 10, day 100 is when that gets patched. And so between the time that it's discovered and the time it's patched, every system is vulnerable to an attack based on that 0-day vulnerability.
And so okay, so it's a vulnerability that nobody knows about. And these, cyber actors and malicious cyber actors are out there scanning. So what types of tools are they using to scan? And does your capability detect these scanning attempts? Can you walk us through the cyber kill chain, I guess, at this point to talk about it in layman's terms, so that people watching who are not the cyber IT guys who want to talk to the C-suite and want to be able to say some of these cool terms and explain how the kill chain works.
Yeah, so I think when a 0-day threat's discovered and an attacker wants to scan for it, they may use an off-the-shelf open source tool to scan for it. They may write some custom code. They may use things like Nmap or MassScan to find likely candidates to attack with these threats. And
how easy are those
I think
to use? You said they're commercially. How easy are these tools to use? Can some middle schooler go out onto the interwebs and download it and start scanning the internet to start harvesting data to sell on the dark web for vulnerabilities?
Yeah, in a matter of minutes, you can use some pretty high-powered tools to scan for vulnerabilities and weaknesses. No problem at all. And so the question is,
so what do they do? I was going to say, what do they do once they scan? They find your victim network. They find your network is vulnerable. Like, oh, look, here's a network I found on the internet. It's vulnerable because they have this vulnerability that hasn't been patched yet. What do they do with that information?
Well, there's two things. They can either try to do something with it themselves, or a lot of times what we see is they resell those vulnerabilities on the black market to other people that might want to exploit it. And so let's take some of these recent firewall vulnerabilities we've seen. You can discover that firewall might be vulnerable to a 0-day just by a simple GET request on a simple path. And so if this path exists and responds in a certain way, that firewall is vulnerable. And a great analogy for how to think about this is, from my time at the White House, you think about this idea of protecting the president at an event. And if you had two ways to protect the president or some other high value target, and option A is I'm going to make sure I'm going to try to find somebody when they start to do something bad. And option B is I'm going to do background checks on everybody and only let in people that I trust. And so when we think about these bulk zero-day scanning, we're working with Gray Noise, our partner, to say, hey, we see these IP scanning for this 0-day, so let's block them before they even try to do anything. So that's another misnomer in security where it just frustrates me, where people are trying to detect the attack and stop it, instead of saying, let's just not let the bad guys even touch our network in the first place. And so, this is part of the discussion in terms of how do we deploy the right technologies to protect our network effectively and efficiently.
This sounds like a 24/7 operation. Do you guys have 24/7 operations? How does it look? Are you guys in dark rooms with cool, like giant computers with green writing everywhere?
We certainly do a lot of analytics, but a key part of our model is how do you automate this machine to machine, right? So how do humans, if you're trying to inject humans to solve this problem, you're going to lose. And so for us, it's automation and data analytics and looking across our customer base to make decisions on the fly, and then working with partners that have data sets that we can use to provide better protection for our customers. So it's much less about a cool SOC than it is about great algorithms and great approaches to implementing automation.
All right. So how, if kind of flipping the script here, if I'm red team, how do I defeat what you guys are doing, right? Like, have you guys thought about it from the adversary's perspective? Like, if I were to uncover your algorithms that are proprietary to you, how could I defeat and defeat your algorithms? Have you? And I guess don't tell us because we don't obviously want to equip anybody. But is that something you guys are thinking about as you grow and scale to figure out how the adversary would work around these?
Yeah, and it is, and we're pretty blunt with our customers in these discussions. So if somebody stands up a custom infrastructure that's never been used before and uses sophisticated tools to attack your network, we probably won't see it, and they'll probably be successful, right? And so our model is, how do you say, if somebody out there in the world knows this is bad, you should block it, and we want to make sure you can block that as quickly and effectively as possible. And so, a great example going back to SolarWinds is, FireEye announced this issue, the IPs came out, and within minutes, all of our customers were protected from that. So, we wouldn't detect this highly sophisticated nation state attack, but we would help protect you once it's discovered, which gets back into the threat information sharing world, right? How do you do this automatically and efficiently?
So, in your experience working with the DIB companies who are in this AWS GovCloud, I won't say pilot program, but this program, what do you find that they come into this with a lot of vulnerabilities that you guys are like, oh my gosh, you guys should fix this? Or are people coming with a pretty decent posture and you're like, okay, like we can work with this and we'll just fix it here and there? Or are people pretty much like, please help me, I don't know what to do? How has that been?
I think it's all over the map. These defense contractors are not running high margin fat cat businesses, right? They are focused on helping the government solve challenges, and whether they're making a sprocket as a part of a machine or they're helping with satellites, they're a lot of these folks are mission driven. And so, our strategy in working with them is, how do we help them be more secure and get better visibility without having to spend money they don't have, without having to hire resources they can't get. And that's what I'm most excited about in our partnership with the program at DICE, is they're continuing to roll out programs where they can help these defense contractors get better without breaking the checkbook. And so they're doing things like helping with vulnerability assessments and thinking about red teaming and all these other activities that are out of their reach. And I think there's a lot of progress in the DoD in this DICE program that I'm really proud to be associated with.
Are any of these companies in the DICE program manufacturers, or are they primarily traditional IT environments?
No, it ranges, from manufacturers that are doing small parts to very large contractors and everything in between.
So is monitoring firewall traffic with an OT environment, is it similar to an IT environment? Because I know NIST 171 was written for the IT information systems, right? But the OT environment is a very different animal altogether. But with the CMMC, they're kind of putting this square peg in a round hole to force 171 requirements onto OT, and it's just not working.
Yeah.
But monitoring from a firewall perspective, have you found success in helping find threats indicators on those OT environments?
Yeah, absolutely. And because of the simplicity and ease of use of our platform, when you look at these OT environments, and you have to have IP enabled OT environments, right? We're not talking about kind of other
Yeah,
technologies, but these are typically, relatively old technology environments that don't have patches, that don't have updates, that have outdated versions of Windows because they can't upgrade it or update them. And so getting
yeah,
visibility into those
absolutely.
networks and protection is key. And again, it's another place where just don't overthink it. Provide some additional visibility and capability and go from there. And so, absolutely on the OT side, there's been a lot of value.
Yeah, that's great. This is the best news I've heard for OT security in a long time, because most people are wondering, how, like, we realize NIST doesn't 800 like, they can assess themselves as like, this control is not applicable, but there's no requirement to have a compensating control. But it sounds like this almost could be, it's not necessarily a control, but it's a compensating activity to help mitigate the risk of not being able to implement multi-factor authentication or encrypt the
Right.
the information as it traverses the shop floor. So that's great. That's good news for OT environments, especially since it's priced per firewall. So I imagine if they just have
Yeah.
one firewall managing their shop floor, it seems pretty affordable.
Yeah, and a lot of these OT environments
Yeah.
don't have a
So
lot of
that.
volume, right? So a lot of these OT environments
Mm,
don't have a lot of
yeah.
volume either. So the ability to say, hey, why is my volume on this network spiked? Why am I seeing new IPs? And so kind of the signal to noise ratio is sometimes even easier on those OT networks than it is on IT networks.
Do you think your capability would have been able to detect the Florida water situation where it was like the industrial control systems that was infiltrated and they were trying to poison the water supply in Florida? Or was it
In
like a
that case,
similar?
I think that was using TeamViewer. And so, right, am I correct in that recollection? So if they were using
I
a
don't know.
TeamViewer, I think that was the one where they were using TeamViewer and they had a simple password. And so the servers and IP addresses might not be any different than TeamViewer there.